Ladies and gentlemen, while having worked in the agri and primary sectors for most of my career, a couple of years ago I took a concerted effort and a lot of care in deciding to focus in on horticulture. So I'm a new kid on the block, you would call me. And a big driver in making that decision was the fact that it appeared that all the planets were aligned, all the ducks were lined up, and it was going to be quite a ride. The biggest industry bodies are pouring R&D money in, everyone's working really hard, the pillows are being fluffed, there's a lot of enthusiasm, and it's a very buoyant industry, and it's an exciting one to be a part of. And these efforts that have gone in have translated to seeing awesome levels of plantings and key crops and outstanding futures for the productivity of the various crops inside the industry. So all of my boxes were ticked and things were looking pretty good, and I am very excited to be in your industry. But once I started going a bit deeper, I started to realise that not everything was quite lined up. And I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, the difficulties we have around labour, a crisis, some would call it. Maybe not yet, but it's certainly lining up to be exactly that. In our world in Jenkins, we're watching a rapidly ageing asset base through the packing facilities. And there's nowhere near enough collaboration taking place to really make the most of the opportunities that lie in front of us. So, quite frankly, I am shitting myself a little bit in that I don't want to be sitting in the audience where you guys are at the horticulture conference in 2030 listening to somebody do a presentation on how maybe we got it wrong or why didn't we get it right. And so that's a very important thing that I keep parked in my head at all times about trying to establish what role we play and what role we all play in the industry moving forward. So as those previous slides suggested, I firmly believe that horticulture has available to it a future that could bump dairy out of that top spot. I know it's a big jump and I know it's a big gap, but I do believe it's possible. From a land use point of view and a resource point of view, it makes a lot of sense for us to be working very hard to develop this part of our primary sector. But this will not and cannot happen without dealing with these three big issues. These are the big buckets that I've filled up with my observations in my first couple of years in the industry and the things I think we need to focus on really clearly. We need to make sure we've got the right people in the industry doing the right jobs. We need the right mix of automation. It's not going to change overnight. There's a lot of work to be done. And we need to get much closer to all of our industry peers. We need to get up and down the supply chain and along the value chain and work very collaboratively because we're only a small nation. So if we first of all take a look at the people part of my puzzle, the current labour pool, in my opinion, needs to be readied to be redeployed. They don't need redeployment just yet. There is some of that taking place, but they need to be ready to match the skills we're going to need in the future because we haven't got them currently. Some of the jobs that we require these people to do are particularly unattractive to many, and that's part of the labour issue. But also the seasonality is a really tough one. So 30,000 odd people we need to find for a couple of months every year is a big call. Now, the RSE program is an awesome example of collaboration between industry and government, and is a critical part of the work we're doing and the job that needs to be done. But it doesn't do everything we need it to do. So, to help illustrate the point, I'm a pictures guy, I ran some quick numbers. And if you convert the number of RSEs that we bring into the country every year into planefuls, it becomes quite an emotive picture. So this year we filled the equivalent of 38 Boeing 787 Dreamliners with people to bring here to help us pack and harvest our products. And I think that that's a really good way of illustrating the fact that while RSE is a critical part of what we do and will be going forward, if you were to double that number to help us moving forward, which we'll need to do on its own, That doesn't seem particularly logical and certainly not sustainable. And so what have we got to be doing now to make that work? So it's really important that I say, don't get me wrong, I think the RSE program is absolutely awesome. I love the fact that we feed wealth into some of those Pacific nations that they wouldn't normally have access to, and clearly it's a pivotal part of how we do what we do. But I guess my point is that, I mean, if you use the one example of the Bay of Plenty region, so for kiwi fruit, at the moment we need about 15,000 people in Bay of Plenty for kiwi fruit, and by 2030 they're expecting that to be around 25,000 people. So a very big jump, and that's just there. And while we're not all in kiwi fruit, it's the same labour pool we're pulling on, and we're all competing for that same labour and that same resource. So on the top of that seasonal issue, which we're working on, we need to deal with a bigger one around the fact that the HR landscape in our industry is changing. So I've pulled on 3 different areas to focus on in terms of what it is that we need to be doing. And the main one here is around, the first one is around geeks. We need to be starting to pull in data geeks into our industry, and they need to become part of our business, not necessarily just consultants and just partners. Sorry. So IoT and Industry 4.0 is coming on like a freight train, and we either need to be on that freight train or watching it whiz past. And the latter is not one of the options available to us if we're to truly exploit the opportunities in front of us. So I guess the point is that we're not just competing for seasonal labour. Now we need to start thinking about the fact we're going to be competing with the Googles and the SAPs and the Xeros for the sort of talent that those guys are recruiting, and we need to be trying to get them into our industry. And we're quite focused at the moment on recruiting horticulturally minded people into the industry, and that needs to shift quite significantly. And then we need the strategists and the lateral thinkers. So while there's certainly plenty of them in the industry, we need to go deeper and wider with that. We need more of these people coming into the industry. We need to be transitioning from being welder and grease gun toting operational people into really starting to go deep on what are the different futures of our industry look like and how are we going to ready ourselves for that. We need some really clever people on the bus to help us there. And the last one is around dreamers and visionaries. And these are the guys and girls that are going to help us shape the way things pan out and make sure we're aligned to make the absolute most of what we do. This is not all about new blood. This isn't all about newbies. We've got some extremely talented people in the industry, and as I said earlier, we need to be reshaping those people and readying them for the new future that's coming before us. So this is about redeployment in our networks and upskilling the leaders of our future. If we take a look from the ground up, if we take a look at the redeployment of our labour assets, you have got the likes of your production staff on the shop floor need to be transitioning from being labour units, packing produce or harvesting produce, into becoming machine operators. And that's not always a really easy thing. It's one of the easier bridges in the puzzle, but it's not always particularly easy. Our supervisors need to get used to dealing with data and systems integration. And not only do they need to be good at that, they need to be comfortable, because they have to be comfortable to be able to own that space in the packing environment. And then our leaders, and this one's the tricky one, our leaders need to learn to be able to manage millennials and Gen Zs. They're coming into the network now, they're a different beast, and we need to be able to work with them closely and leverage what that is that they bring to the team. So while we've got some awesome organisations that are working really hard on attracting talent into the organisation, there's a couple of bits missing. So I work in the Bay of Plenty area for Young Grower, and Jenkins sponsor several of the competitions around the country. And in Tauranga we have an annual event called Cultivate Your Career, where we fill buses with high school students or soon-to-be school leavers, and we take them around some of the really cool horticultural operators in the region to kind of create some enthusiasm and sell them on the idea of this being a great industry to work in, which it absolutely is. The problem is that those people already had a bit of a leaning. They were already thinking about it and they're interested. And it's important that we close the deal and we make sure we get them on board. But where are those geeks? Where are the strategists? Where's our future supply chain gurus? They're not on those buses. And so we need to figure out how we start attracting those people in. So when we take a look at automation, in this part of the puzzle, I need to make the point that everything you need right now to fully automate a pack line exists. So while there's technologies developing all the time, it's possible right now to be emptying bins and trays, grading that fruit, getting that fruit into a punnet or a tray, getting that tray into a box, conveying that box away, palletisation, strapping. You can even use autonomous vehicles to get that into a cool store location. So all of that technology exists right now. But we're all sort of standing around with our welders and grease guns, looking at each other going, well, where is that return on investment? And it's a fair question, because if you look at labour alone, it isn't there. We in this industry appear to love spreadsheets that result in a 2-year kind of payback on an investment, and you will not get that out of labour. However, the question I want to pose to you guys is, if it's not automation, then what is it? What will we do if it's not automation? So if we don't automate, then what return on investment will you get from a crop you can't pack, or a crop you can't ship, or a crop you can't pick? So at Jenkins, we have a little internal phrase that I'm sharing called the cost of not, coined by Roy Sharplin and our team. And basically what we're talking about here is, what is the cost of not automating? So it's not so much about what's the ROI, what's the cost if we don't do this? What's the outcome that we'll hit up against? So when I talk about this, while I said we can fully automate a pack line now, I'm not talking about the elusive lights out production. I'm not talking about the mythical beast that is the pack house of the future that we always talk about. I'm talking about simple, systemic, progressive asset renewal and technology deployment in the pack house. So you can put all of these pieces of the puzzle in incrementally and get them talking to each other very friendly and holding hands now, and evolve that over time. That doesn't have to happen all at once. That doesn't need to be a $10 million project in year one. You don't have to do the whole lot. So this can be progressive. So if that's the thing that stops us, we need to be thinking a bit deeper about that, because it doesn't need to be the case. Further is the fact that the solutions available for the different sectors. So we've got the big boys who are happy to have the big CapEx projects, and that's fine, but there's a lot of smaller players too that are going to struggle to stay relevant. And while the equipment may not be made in Germany, it may not be quite as fast, and it may not last quite as long, there are solutions there for all areas in the industry. So my fear is that by 2025 or 2030, we've got crops rotting on the ground because we did all of the work at the back end, getting all the plantings and getting the motivation and the enthusiasm and getting the markets developed, but we forgot the piece in the middle. So the third bucket I had was around collaboration. So while the other two buckets are critical and important, this one is the one that has serious legs on it. That we are a small island nation, and that without collaborating, we're not going to make the most of this opportunity. So statistically speaking, about 50% of the people in this room have in their pocket a device that wouldn't exist without this historically famous collaboration with these two Steves coming together and forming Apple in 1976. And that's one example, and there's tons of them, but that's one example of the sort of rocket ship kind of collaboration we could achieve in this industry. Whether those people are in the industry now or yet to arrive or yet to be born, who knows? But that's the sort of collaboration that we need to really hit our straps. So we have some astonishingly clever individuals in the industry currently, and we need to make sure we're pulling them together and getting them on the same group or on the same forum. And we need to be working harder to make sure that's as pan-industry as possible, so that we have supply chain representatives and supplier representatives and grower representatives, because while we may have isolated pain points, collaboratively we can share in the upside. We have to share in the pain, and we have to share our toys. So the days, in my opinion, are gone of operating in silos and keeping everything a bit secretive to give yourself an advantage over your competitor or your neighbour or whatever the case may be, because I think it's definitely a case of 1 + 1 equaling 3 in this example. One example that we have in Jenkins is a collaboration that we've done with Robotics Plus, and that has resulted in the fully commercialised Apple Packer branded Apollo that's on our stand here. So that's the global debut of a product that was invented here in New Zealand. It's a world first in doing what it does. And while we can't claim anything close to having come up with it, without our collaboration, it wouldn't be there just yet. And so it's really important to know that while we could wait for the Robotics Pluses of the world to turn up with the next greatest thing, that will happen a lot faster if we're all a part of the conversation at the beginning rather than the end. So rather than us turning up to sell you an Apple Packer, we don't want to sell anything. We want it to be a logical transition in the industry about how we solve your problems. So some of the collaborations that we are working on are some of these brands here. There's a bunch more, but I use these ones to show that we're talking about research institutes, and Callaghan's a great partner. Robotics Plus is key. We've formed a JV up in the States with the Jenkins of North America, and this is helping us collaborate in our part of the conversation, but it doesn't help necessarily you guys directly solve your pain points. We're doing our best, we're trying to figure out what they are, and we're having lots of conversations, but we need you guys to be a part of those conversations at the same time. So, I mean, I urge you to be talking to your suppliers, whatever part of your business it's in. Talk to your industry associations, try and get their weight to help you form these groups that could help evolve and expedite the way that we deal with these problems and take advantage of the future that lies before us. Science is being done, the plantings are ramping up, that those markets are getting ready, and we need to make sure we don't miss the boat on this one. So just to wrap up and go back to my first sort of infographic, we need to get those right people. We need to make sure we've got the right automation solutions. I know it can be a bit scary, and a lot of the conversations I have with people are around, oh, I think I'll see how John goes and I'll wait till next year, or see what the neighbour's up to, or I think I'll wait and see if something better comes out soon. But if we keep iterating on that cycle, we're going to be in trouble. And as I said, that collaboration piece is really, really key. We really need to start talking together, sharing our investments, and leveraging the greater good of that 1 + 1 = 3. Thank you very much.